If you were to ask someone which version of Persona 4 they'd rather play, chances are they'll answer with Persona 4 Golden, and it's easy to see why. This version of the game has more content, it's dirt cheap, and most importantly, it's available on every platform under the sun. This fact alone makes Persona 4 Golden the more attractive choice between the two for both first-time and returning players. What's the point in bothering to track down an old PS2 copy of this game when you can just get the newer one that has more features and content? On the surface, it's hard to disagree with the proposition. In fact, I myself used to believe that Golden was the best way to play the game. Though, over the years, I've found myself preferring the classic version more and more, to the point where I'd argue that it's a better way to experience P4 on the whole. Now, that might sound a little crazy to some people. I wouldn't be surprised if the first reaction to my statement is a resounding, "Really?" And yeah, I get it. To a lot of people, vanilla Persona 4 is obsolete and not even worth experiencing. While that crowd is entitled to have that opinion, it's not one that I really agree with, and I find the way that some fans outright reject the original game to be a bit silly, especially when I'm sure that most of them would find a lot to enjoy if they were willing to give this game a chance. But Persona 4 is a long game, about 80 hours on average, even longer if you stop to smell the roses. It's a lot of time to sink into a game, and not everyone is in the mood for RPGs, and that's why I'm here, to put that time in for you to let you know what's up. Persona 4 on PS2 might initially look to be a rather basic version of the game, but sometimes less is more, and that's what I'm going to be focusing on today. Something that I want to make clear is that regardless of my preference, I still find Persona 4 Golden to be a good version of the game, all things considered. Just because I like the original one more, that doesn't mean I'd scoff and turn my nose up at Golden if it was the only thing on my plate, you know? A lot of what I'm about to mention might seem inconsequential if you've only played Golden. While it's fine to think that, I hold the belief that just because something might not matter to you, it doesn't mean that nobody cares about it. I'm not expecting everyone to agree with me, but I would appreciate if you just heard me out for a second. Also, I'm gonna be assuming that we've all played at least one version of this game. There's only so much I can talk about without just spoiling it outright, so here's your warning now. Just play Persona 4, man, I really don't care which. It's a great game no matter which one you go with. No need to throw a fit over it. For a lot of people, what separates Persona 4 Golden from the classic game is the addition of Marie. Maybe if you peel back a layer, you'll find people talking about the visual differences. While this stuff is interesting to discuss, I hardly see anyone talk about the gameplay differences outside of some of the more basic additions. But to be fair to Golden, some of them are pretty good. For example, manual skill inheritance. Every Atlas game on PS2 shared the same basic framework for their fusion systems. Fused demons would inherit a select few skills from their parent demons. However, what skills you would get from a fusion was largely left up to chance. Certain demons had a higher likelihood of inheriting specific kinds of skills than others, which is a good way of helping them feel more distinct aside from their standard stats and affinities. The issue that this system had is that if you had a specific demon build in mind, actually getting it to show up in the fusion results took more effort than it should have. Manual skill inheritance, at least in the form that we know it now, was first implemented in Persona 4 Golden, and yeah, I'd say that it was a good decision in the long run. Not only does it save time, but laying out all of your potential skill options in a single menu makes it so much easier for players to decide what personas they want to build. In fact, it could even allow you to see strategies that you otherwise wouldn't have thought about with the system that we had before. I like it. In fact, Golden has a lot of small additions that I like. Quest management is a lot more straightforward because NPCs are now marked. New personas were added and party members were reworked slightly to give them more gameplay variety. Equipable costumes were added into the game, and my personal favorite, the addition of custom difficulty modifiers. This is a feature that needed to be unlocked in the Vita release, but it's available by default in the PC version at the very least. This isn't groundbreaking stuff by any means, but these are nice additions that I welcome with open arms. The changes that I'm not so enthralled with are the ones that have the largest impact on the dungeon crawling experience. One of the first things I ask myself whenever I play a video game re-release is whether or not gameplay changes are worth it. Are we making alterations because the foundation itself is shaky, or are we just doing this for the sake of change and seeing what exactly sticks? A good example of the former would be the Kingdom Hearts games, primarily the final mixed versions of KH1 and 2. When these two games got re-releases, the new features were rooted in the design elements that were already present, taking gameplay mechanics that otherwise weren't the most fleshed out on their own Golden and placing more emphasis on them, giving the player more reasons to use these mechanics outside of variety. Persona 4 Golden, on the other hand, adds brand new mechanics that overwrite the importance of what was there previously. On paper, the new shuffle time is a really good idea. In the original game, shuffle time was a bit lame compared to Persona 3's. There were only a handful of mini-games, and the only rewards you got were new personas. In Golden, shuffle time was redesigned to be this super interesting solitaire game. The more punishments you accept, the more card draws you get. If you manage to draw every card available, then you'll get a sweep bonus, a guarantee that the next battle will end with a shuffle time. On its own, the new shuffle time is actually a rather fun mini-game. However, it's not one that I think fits Persona 4's game design all too well. Persona 4 is a game about pushes and pulls. Everything you do has a cost, whether that be a literal price in the case of buying something, or in a metaphorical sense. Aside from yen, Persona 4's main currency is time. If you want to level up social links to make the dungeon crawling easier, then you have to sacrifice at least one in-game day per rank. Short-term decisions have long-term consequences, since you can find yourself in a position where you just won't have enough time to clear out the dungeon if you're not prepared. The alternative is to rush the dungeon as soon as it's available, but that poses its own challenges. Everything in Persona 4 was designed with this tug-of-war in mind. The only way to heal SP in the PS2 game was to spend money on the Fox, get lucky with some chess, or take a gamble through Arcana Chance. Arcana Chance was this coin flip mechanic that had the opportunity of appearing after a shuffle time. Each Arcana had a unique effect that could either be harmful or helpful depending on where it lands. It was up to the player to decide if the reward was worthy of the risk. I don't find this to be a perfect system, mind you. Some Arcanas are shitty no matter the position, and there are a handful where their effects are barely felt. Then again, I'm a bit of a high roller myself. The Death Arcana is the pinnacle of high risk, high reward. If it's upright, you get all of your SP back, but lose all of your HP, and facing downwards does the opposite. This card has the potential of vastly extending your dungeon visit if you're willing to take the risk of prematurely ending it. However, if it does backfire, you're gonna have to rely on the Fox to get your SP back up, or worse, potentially waste some of the more rare items. Arcana Chance isn't perfect. I think it's a bit weird how the game just doesn't warn you of any of the consequences, but it fits well with the theming of the rest of the game, long-term consequences for short-term decisions. Shuffle time in Persona 4 Golden, while undoubtedly a better minigame, doesn't work all too well with Persona 4's natural design. A lot of the blame stems from the severe neutering of the risk factor. You ever wonder why physical builds are so popular in Persona 4 Golden? It's because of shuffle time. The Magician card can be used to upgrade any random skill of your currently equipped persona. And in the case of physical skills, they can be upgraded to some of the most powerful attacks in the game. You can get God's Hand as early as the 4th dungeon if you're willing to work for it. Magician cards did exist in the original game, but you couldn't choose what persona would receive the upgrade, and if it backfired, your attack would actually be downgraded instead. The only real penalty cards in Golden are the ones that make you earn less money and experience for the fight. But that doesn't mean a whole lot in the long run, because you can just as easily make it all back and then some. I would argue that the benefits of guaranteeing a sweep bonus overpower any of the potential penalties you'd face in the short term. The only time where you could make the argument to drop a sweep bonus is if you kill a bunch of gold hands and you just don't want to risk losing that experience. Let's talk about that real quick actually. In the PS2 Persona 4, gold shadows only dropped money and chest keys. In Golden, they also drop a lot of experience, and I mean a lot, especially if you manage to grab an experienced tarot card from shuffle time. In my most recent playthrough of the game, I managed to hit close to level 90 by the time I made it to the Adachi dungeon. I wasn't even using some hidden technique to farm a lot of experience. Shuffle time is just that exploitable. When playing Persona 4 on PS2, you don't have that safety net to rely on. This means that you're forced to invest yourself in this game's unique mechanics if you want to stand a chance against some of the tougher foes. Let me ask you guys something. How many of you know about Fusion Forecast and actively use it? In case you're unaware, Fusion Forecast was this really cool mechanic whereby fusing personas on certain days, you could trigger special effects. These could range from triggering skill mutations, earning bonus Arcana experience, extra stat points, and even skills. This mechanic is still present in Golden, but because Shuffle Time offers so many benefits that are just as good, if not better, you can outright ignore it and just forget that it's even in the game. The same is true with fishing, to be honest. This was another mechanic that was introduced in Persona 4. Most people only do this for the sake of catching the Sea Guardian for the Fox social link, but did you know you could also trade what you catch for items? Sometimes you'll even get some pretty good exclusive equipment if you take the time to get it. This stuff isn't needed in Golden because the game is far too easy to justify putting in that effort, which is ironic because that version of the game actually added a second location to fish at. Not that it matters anyway because Golden added gardening, which is just a better version of fishing since it takes no time. Because Persona 4 on PS2 has less ways to get overpowered items, I ended up feeling more motivated to do side quests compared to Golden. In my most recent playthrough, I ended up going through the game on expert mode, and yeah, it doesn't mess around. Resource management is a lot more strenuous here, not just because shuffle time isn't as good, but because enemies also have less weaknesses for the player to exploit. As early as the first dungeon, the game expects you to rely on more niche skills like Hama and Mudo if you want to score some 1-mores and all-out attacks. As a result, you'll end up burning through more SP than you might be used to, which means it's more challenging to complete the dungeon in a single visit. Something that I've noticed is that a lot of people stress out about being able to see everything that a game has to offer in a single playthrough. I personally know a few people who only play games exclusively following guides, doubly true when it comes to the Persona games. I understand having that fear of missing out on worthwhile content, and if this method of playing games helps you enjoy it more, then more power to you. However, I would argue that having an over-reliance on guides that come with specific instructions for every in-game day might skew your perspective on said game a bit. Persona 4 came out during an era where developers were much more comfortable with players potentially missing content. P4 in particular has 2 social links that are outright inaccessible in one playthrough. You're meant to play through these games on New Game Plus to experience the content you initially missed out on. That's the reason why the 100% social link reward is something that's only useful for the endgame super boss, which is only available on a second run-through. When following a guide religiously, you end up missing out on personable moments since it removes the ability to make your own decisions for most of the game. You know, I kind of like having to think about what I spend my time doing in advance. Should I go to the dungeon now, or maybe I wait for the fusion forecast to change into something that fits my priorities? Every once in a while, I like to kick back and go fishing so I can catch something good to use on its own, or trade for a good piece of equipment. If you're one of those people who plays these games with guides, I do recommend at least trying a playthrough without them, and experiment with mechanics that you otherwise would have ignored. This applies to both versions, but it's more valuable to explore this stuff in the original because there aren't any alternatives like in Golden. Though, if there's one thing that separates the combat difficulty between these games, it's that Persona 4 Golden is more comfortable with holding your hand than the original was. It's a lot of small things that, on their own, might not seem like much, but end up having a rather large impact when taken in its totality. For example, follow-up attacks can now be done by party members that aren't participating in combat. There are some other small things too, like fusion attacks, all-out attack buffs, and dungeon layouts resetting during gameplay instead of after you leave. I can see why some players would appreciate changes like this, but I find that these bonuses do more to sway the game into the player's favor rather than balancing everything out. Part of the reason why I enjoy games like SMT Nocturne so much is because the balance between enemy and player is a lot more equal than in other turn-based games. Everyone works off the same core mechanics, but each side has certain advantages over the other to keep things interesting. The player is able to pass the turns of their demons and use items. Enemies often come with more complicated formations, and some bosses can even extend their turns. It's not a perfect system, but giving both sides clear advantages over the other works wonders in making things feel fair. Out of all of the new features added in Golden, the one that kneecaps the difficulty the most are the reworks done with Rise. In the original Persona 4, Rise wasn't anything to write home about. She's meant to be this game's navigator, taking the mantle from Teddy when he awakens to his persona. In terms of combat abilities, Rise didn't offer a whole lot that Teddy didn't, though there are some obvious differences between the two. Since Rise specialized in navigation skills, she did get a handful of supportive abilities. Mainly, she would occasionally scan the enemy to reveal one of its affinities. This was the reward you got for maxing out her social link, and yeah, it's some nice info to have. In Persona 4 Golden, Rise was reworked entirely to essentially become a 5th party member that doesn't have a health bar. She can fully scan enemies for free, protect the party from instant kills, revive the main character, and even occasionally jump in during battle to buff and heal the party. If you were to rank every party member in Persona 4 Golden, then honestly, you could make the argument that Rise is the most valuable unit in the game. Whenever I play P4G, I try to hard focus Rise's social link whenever I have the chance to, because the benefits I get by doing so far outweigh anyone else's. Rise does a rather good job at reading the room and will pick her effects based on whatever would benefit you the most at any given time. Since these abilities are activated automatically on a completely separate plane of existence than where the battle is taking place, I think it's safe to say that it's a bit of an unfair advantage. The obvious counter-argument to this is that if you don't like Rise's abilities and how she can interfere with combat, then just don't do her social link. Unfortunately, that answer isn't good enough for me, I'm sorry. You have to acknowledge what exactly you're losing out on by making that decision. You don't get to see the conclusion to Rise's character and story arc. Lovers' personas become less effective in combat because you don't get the Arcana bonus for fusion, and there's also the fact that the social links are meant to help express some of the game's core themes. This is some valuable content that players of Persona 4 are going to want to experience because it's like the point of the game. You're kind of giving up a lot just to protect the game balance, and that shouldn't be the player's responsibility. In an ideal world, Golden would be balanced around the acquisition of these new support abilities. Hell, the old ones got buffed too. You not only get them earlier than the original, but they also get upgraded to be even better than they were before. I don't know, there's something about Rise in this game that makes it feel like I'm playing on baby mode. Like mom and dad are hiding around the corner to catch me in case I fall off my bike. But the twist is that I'm 25 and it's unnecessary. In the Resident Evil 1 remake, Capcom compared difficulty to that of a walk. When booting up the game for the first time, instead of giving you a traditional difficulty selection, the option was instead framed in a question. How do you like your hikes? Do you prefer casual walks, a slightly more strenuous trail, or a full-on mountain climb? This comparison can apply to more games than just Resident Evil, and it can be used to help understand why players like me value difficulty in games. The main appeal to mountain climbing is getting to see what the view is like at the top. However, what makes that view so special is the effort that it took to achieve that goal, and to a lot of people, the journey is just as valuable as the destination. By removing that struggle and just giving people the view that they originally worked for, sure, some would be satisfied, but the ones that found value in the right to earn that view might not get the same satisfaction as they originally did. In a perfect world, there would be an option to keep that challenge, so the people who valued that struggle can still enjoy what they fell in love with. Does that make any sense? I'm the type of player that doesn't like it when victories are just handed to me. I want to be encouraged to explore my options and make the most of them. Getting stuck at certain parts in games can sometimes be a good thing, since it makes overcoming the odds feel all the more sweeter. Persona 4 on PS2 appeals more to this mindset than Golden does, which is why I'm comfortable in saying that this version of the game has the better gameplay between the two, even if there's technically less features. But here's the thing, I don't want to discredit everything Golden added to the Persona 4 experience because there are some welcomed additions. A lot of it might not look to be a whole lot at first, but trust me, it does add value to the experience. Stuff like trying to get your driver's licenses so you can pick up girls only for it to horribly backfire, going to the beach with a group of friends to make some long-lasting summer memories, and one that I relate to a lot, being able to sneak out of your house at night and running into people that you know from school. Takes me back to my own days in high school. Persona 4 was already a game that puts emphasis on the idea of appreciating the small things in your everyday life. These events lean into that rather well. At the time of experiencing them, you might not realize just how much these moments will mean to you in the future. I'm happy to see that Golden understood this and decided to capitalize on the opportunity. But this begs the question as to whether or not these more lighthearted moments contrast harshly with just how serious the main story really is. To me, there's two types of Persona 4. There's Persona 4, the murder mystery about accepting the truth, no matter how difficult and unpleasant it might be. And then there's Persona 4, the goofy high school game that has a lot of anime bullshit in it. This balance is something that the original game already struggles with a bit, but Golden doubles down on. For example, during the point of the story where tensions are building up and the game's greatest tragedy is about to take place, you're suddenly thrust into this wacky band sequence that's completely disconnected from the rest of the game, both narratively and thematically. I like how Atlas put Namatame in the background here as if this was some next level foreshadowing. Like, sure, whatever you say, guys. Golden attempts to enhance the main narrative through its new social links, and the results are a bit mixed. The Adachi link is honestly some pretty good stuff. As the main antagonist of the game, he's meant to embody the values that Persona 4 is against. He's someone that's meant to represent the dangers of isolation and how a refusal to change your outlook on life can lead you down a dark path. Adachi is a raging narcissist that believes the world failed him because he followed all the rules and was rewarded with a life of mediocrity. Rather than accepting his place in the world and learning to appreciate the relationships that he does have, he instead lets his anger fester and boil, eventually morphing him into the monster that we see at the end of the game. I always found Adachi to be a compelling villain because he takes the game's core messages but twists them in a negative sense. The masks that we wear around others aren't used to explore different perspectives, rather they're used for manipulation and selfish desires. His refusal to change himself is what leads Adachi to his ultimate downfall. Golden decided to expand on these ideas by giving him a social link, and it's some pretty good stuff. Though, much like Ken's linked episode from Persona 3 Reload, I can't help but feel as though the game is inadvertently playing its hand too early. The entire point of the Adachi twist is that it plays around with the ideas of perspective and expectation. Throughout the story, it's demonstrated that people are willing to accept lies as long as it comforts and affirms their current worldviews. This is shown through Mitsuo, a copycat killer who takes credit for the original murders, and everyone was willing to accept that truth. The game plays with this again with Namatame, but adds some extra theatrics and a personal involvement to make it easier for the player to accept this lie as the truth. You're even given a bad ending for indulging in that lie. Expanding on Adachi's character to make his motivations easier to understand is a good thing. However, with the way the social link is formatted now, I can't help but feel as though first-time players will catch on to the twist too early. This is because about halfway through the link, it switches the format from a side activity that the player actively needs to engage in to a story-based social link like Teddy's. Adachi is meant to be someone you're not supposed to think about all too much. He's presented as a character like Mororoka is, a side character that's meant to demonstrate that the authorities in P4 are rather incompetent. Giving him a social link just naturally shines a spotlight on him, and I think that in of itself has the potential of tipping off first-time players, planting the expectations in you that maybe this guy has a lot more going on than you might think. As much as I like this social link in a vacuum, and believe that it enhances his character, maybe we would have been better off saving it until New Game Plus. Gives people another reason to go through the game, you know? The other social link is Marie, which I think I'm safe in saying is a rather controversial character. I don't really think Persona 4's story improves with her inclusion. It's something that can be ignored and you won't really notice anything. In fact, the game even puts in a safety net in case you do decide to ignore Marie by in-universe wiping the character's memories of her. Kinda makes you question the inclusion when, regardless of your decisions, the story is basically the same whether you interact with this character or not. If you do choose to ignore her though, it creates this awkward period in the game where after beating the main villain, the game just sort of keeps going on for an extra month. It's time that you can use to max out the remainder of your social links and grab the new third-tier personas, but it's nothing more than that. We've already explored all of the game's themes at this point, and by the time you hit January, you're just buying time until you fight the actual final boss. I only bring this up because I was that guy that never finished Marie's social link on my first playthrough. I didn't get the extra dungeon, so that bonus month in the game felt kind of pointless. Not that it matters to me anyway, because Snowy Inaba is pretty cozy. If there's one thing that you should take away from this video, it's that Persona 4 Golden is a solid way to play through the game. It's a game that holds a lot of value to countless people, myself included. Without Golden, I would have never been introduced to this world and story to begin with. In that sense, it holds tremendous value to me. Nowadays, I view Persona 4 Golden less as the de facto version of the game, and rather just a neat alternate take on the core mechanics. The new gameplay additions to Golden, while not meshing all too well with the default experience, ironically makes it the more fun game to do challenge runs of. How many times have you seen people attempt the fabled Izanagi only run? It's something that even I ended up doing in my free time a while back. It's easy to come up with all sorts of wacky and creative rule sets when the game's baseline mechanics are able to be exploited to make that a reality. In that sense, I can see why there are people out there that, yeah, would prefer it, but for me, it's only a once in a while thing, you know? If I want to get that core Persona 4 experience where I go through the story, experience the social links, and get a solid gameplay experience, then I'm more than satisfied with the PS2 game. It might have less overall features and has a lower resolution and frame rate, but much like the town of Inaba itself, there's beauty in that simplicity. Oh, and also the fog looks better too. I could have just let off with that, to be honest. What else does anyone even care about?
It's not. 2 enemies left. Here goes.